You had it.
I still got it for Saturday. I wasn't feeling good. Sunday I was down. Yesterday I was down.
That's it. You have 2 days.
Well, I will be at the end.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, you're right. See, you're right.
Here, before you head out, I need to get your signature on this one. We can get to that. Don't forget. Has anybody heard from Jalen and Curtis? Were they planning on coming?
Oh, yeah.
To Friday? I think Curtis is here. Oh, Curtis is here. And Jalen, we have. Is Jalen here? No, we gotta be. Me neither. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm not teaching. No, I don't.
Looking at summary of our last meeting and answer questions.
Yeah, he's more.
What did it come from? His address or it's
I don't know.
awesome. I read it.
I did too. I think it was good to call.
This is the ultimate.
Did you forward us anything from Chris Hoffman? No, it was right after last meeting. Suggestions for questions. It is from Chris. KAUFMAN. I will be 10 minutes late, about 10 minutes late. It is 3:01. And we do have a meeting at 5, so we don't want to wait. Do we want to knock on the door and tell, should I knock on the door and tell them I'm starting? Jaylyn said she would be about 10 minutes, so no. Are you ready, Brandon? I'm calling to order this special meeting of the Grand County Council. It is Tuesday, October 30th. The time is 3:02. Present, Greg Halliday. Jaylyn Hawks will be here momentarily. Evan Clapper, Curtis Wells, Mary McGann, Rory Paxman, Terry Morris, Council Administrator Ruth Dillon, and Clerk Auditor Diana Carroll. This is a workshop on our health insurance plans and options of the cost. I would like Mark Johnson and people to come to the table and do your presentation, and we will see, make sure we have the questions we want explained, answered. Thank you.
Well, we're happy to be here.
And what was your name?
My name's Mark Johnson. And I'm Rick Stewart. We represent GS Benefits, we're a benefit consulting firm for the county. I'm not exactly sure where to start. I think we're just going to kind of jump in. One of the questions that was on the list was where the membership has been with the two types of plans. So there's a traditional plan and a qualified high deductible plan. And we may just start with that and kind of give you a flavor of kind of how those two plans have progressed over the years. Then at that point, I think we'll talk a little bit about qualified high deductible plans and health savings accounts, and kind of give you a little background as to what that type of program is and why that's currently in the county, and how you may want to proceed with that type of program. So what Rick has handed out is just an enrollment history starting with 2013. I think the qualified high deductible plan was maybe a year or two prior to 2013, but it's interesting to see where the enrollment began and where that enrollment lies today. So you can see in 2013 about 106 employees on the traditional plan, 18 on the qualified high deductible plan, and how that has over time migrated to where we now have 56 on the traditional plan and 90 on the qualified high deductible plan. And maybe just what we have here on the screen is a little bit of background on qualified high deductible and HSA or health savings account, and we felt like it might be wise to just give an overview on this type of plan, kind of how that relates to traditional. So, Rick, I mean, I should kind of jump in.
Great. So, HSAs came about in 2004 when they were put into law. And HSA stands for Health Savings Account. And that's just what it is. It's actually an account that a person can take with them into retirement. So we talk here on this about consumerism. One of the things that we're hoping that it does for your employees is that they take a higher deductible plan and therefore lower premiums, and then the savings that the county and they realize as a result of those lower premiums they can put into this health savings account tax-free, and it becomes their money. So the hope is that when it becomes more their money in their retirement account, they'll be a little bit more judicious about how they spend those healthcare dollars. So that's the first thing we're hoping that they'll do is become better consumers as a result of that. And then, as I mentioned as well, there's some tax savings that goes with that. The money goes in tax-free. It gross tax-free, and then it can come out tax-free as well, which makes it a very unique account. There's really no other retirement account that I'm aware of that has those triple tax advantages. So in exchange for that, though, the IRS says, well, if we're going to give you this special tax advantage account, we want you to have that in conjunction with a high deductible health plan. So when we use the word qualified high deductible health plan, that's qualified. It's the IRS that determines what's qualified or not. So they have some basic guidelines, such as this first bullet point here, no first dollar coverage. So, you know, on a traditional plan, you're accustomed to, well, I can go to the doctor, pay a $15 copay, and I don't have to worry about my deductible. In the HSA scenario, everything falls under that deductible, so there really isn't that upfront copay. And then they also want it to be a high deductible health plan. They define that for a single currently that's at $1,350, or for a family it's $2,700. So those are just kind of some of the basic guidelines that the IRS will ask for that plan to be qualified, and we get that plan through the insurance carrier like Cigna. And then just a couple other things. In order to put money into an HSA, you cannot be covered under another non-qualified plan. So if you're covered, for example, under your spouse's plan and they work in the school district and that's a traditional plan, the IRS doesn't want you being on a traditional plan at the same time as you're putting money into your HSA. Cannot currently be covered on Medicare and not claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax return. And then the money can be used tax-free on qualified medical expenses. That's qualified, you know, again by the IRS. It's a publication 502. It's the same list that you may be accustomed to with FSAs. And it's a lot of the things that you'd expect, just medical care expenses you can pay for tax-free. The other thing the IRS limits is that they of course don't want you putting in just tons of money tax-free, so they'll cap it. And each year this goes up a little bit. For 2019, for example, a family is able to put in $7,000 a year tax-free, or if you're over the age of 55, there's a catch-up contribution where you can add another $1,000 to that $7,000. And then you may have seen in the news this past month, there's a couple of bills that passed the House this year that would really significantly change and kind of loosen the rules around an HSA, and so we're kind of watching those. But for example, they would just let you put a lot more money in each year tax-free. So we'll see if anything comes about as a result of those.
Just a note on the maximum contribution, that's in combination. So the county is now putting, or we're making contributions to those employee accounts in combination with what the employee chooses to put in on their own. That combination is the maximum receipt.
How that is calculated?
In terms of what the county puts in, or in terms of how the IRS determines that?
I guess the formula of how much the county's putting in versus.
It's really up to the employer as to what they want to put into that account. The recommendation is that the employer put no more than about a third of your out-of-pocket maximum. Okay? So we looked at what you're currently putting in relationship to your out-of-pocket maximum. Maybe just share that with them.
Yeah, so your out-of-pocket maximum on your qualified high deductible health plan right now is $4,000 for a single, and then it's $6,550 for a family. So a third of that $4,000 would be $1,320 for the year, and currently the county is putting in for a single $100 a month, or $1,200 on the year. So you're very close to what we would recommend as that contribution on the single. Similar on the family, a third of that $6,550 would be $2,161, and you're currently giving a family $200 a month, which equates to $2,400 on the year. So you're pretty close to what we recommend.
And when we talk about that third of your out-of-pocket maximum, as we talk to the actuary, he's basically saying if you get too excessive in that contribution into that account, then you start to defeat the purpose of the consumerism, the qualified high deductible plan. So that's why he suggests, well, we look at probably about a third of that out-of-pocket maximum. So so folks are more aware of, okay, there's this deductible, my employer's giving me this amount, maybe I need to make some contributions of my own to have some ownership into that program as well, because as we look at this, the employee is having to come up with the dollars to fill that gap, to pay that deductible. Okay? And so the employer's helping to do that. Hopefully the employee puts some dollars into that account as well. So as you're now incurring medical expenses, you have this health savings account, you own the money that's in that account. So what the county puts in, they own that money, they take it with them. So if they were to quit, retire, whatever, that money that's in that account goes with them, and their own contribution goes with them as well. So, as Rick mentioned, there's some ownership now, some consumerism involved here, because, hey, this is my money that's in this account, and as I shop for healthcare services, I may, look at the cost of that care over closely. Do I need to see a specialist? Maybe a family practitioner will do. Do I really need the brand name drug? Maybe a generic will do, because now those dollars are coming out of my health savings account. So I think coming back to this sheet here, where we see the migration from the traditional to the qualified high deductible plan, I think when this first came out, people were nervous because they look at that large deductible and say, hey, I'm exposed here, I don't like that kind of exposure, I just like paying my copay. But really not understanding the concept of the program that, you have this health savings account to use to help to pay for those out-of-pocket expenses. So I think as folks have learned about it, become more accustomed to it, recognize, hey, the county is putting some money into this account in my behalf to pay for these out-of-pocket expenses. I think folks are more comfortable with this, and therefore starting to migrate away from the traditional into the qualified high deductible.
I'll just expand a little bit. In 2011, that amount was set by the council, and it hasn't changed.
So there's not a legal requirement.
It's up to the county. It stayed the same.
And I don't know that your out-of-pocket has necessarily changed from that point in time as well, if it has been a nominal change.
I think that the deductible did go up at some
Yeah.
point, and so did that.
Yeah, ACA requires that your employee exposure or individual exposure is limited. It's like $6,500 is the maximum exposure that an individual can have. And so as that has increased, sometimes the carriers will make some adjustments to your deductible out-of-pocket. Overall, there hasn't really been a request or a need to make a change to the deductible. That kind of helped give a good background as to why we have both programs. We have a traditional and a qualified high deductible.
Do you have a question?
Question. The health savings account, the money goes into the person's banking account.
It's a separate bank account that's usually with the carrier of Health Equity. It's a locally based trustee that does a lot of the HSAs. But it could be any number of different.
In this instance, you're using the institution, National Benefit Services. So they they basically act as a bank.
How much do they skip that for service?
There's an admin fee that is being paid for that account, so you actually, you still have flex spending as well, right? Okay. So back in the day, if folks are familiar with flexible spending or cafeteria plan 125, on traditional plans, that has allowed folks to pay for out-of-pocket expenses pre-tax. Okay? And we pay a vendor to track those dollars. So when people incur expenses, they might have a claim form or a debit card, run it through that, it's drawn out of the account to pay for their out-of-pocket expenses. Same thing with the health savings account, which is now tied to that qualified high deductible plan. You have a debit card typically and administrative services to handle that, so they'll charge an annual fee to do that, but not a percentage of what's in the savings account, it's just an administrative.
How big is it?
It's generally about $3 per employee per month.
Plus a card.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think if that's just on the flex spending. But typically there's a card thing as well. Now,
And the employees pay that?
I don't know if the county's paying that admin fee or if that's built in.
The county pays for admin, it's $3 per person on that.
But flex spending, I think the employee pays. No, maybe not.
Yeah, one nice thing, once you build up a certain amount in that health savings account, you can then start to invest that into mutual funds. So,
Is that the only option? Mutual funds?
it varies from, bank to bank. I don't know totally what's available in terms of what you can invest it in.
You can leave it not invested at all. Next to nothing. It's very little, and if you're not investing, I think it's very little.
But as Rick mentioned, there's a couple of ways to look at this. One, yes, it is a health savings account to be used for medical, dental, vision, out-of-pocket expenses, and you're using tax-free dollars to accomplish that. Okay. But you can also consider this as a retirement account as well. It can really be viewed like a 401k or an IRA. So if folks are able to save those dollars, take those with them right into retirement, you can continue to use those for health care, tax-free, or you can use it for, paying regular income tax on it and use it for whatever you want to use it for.
How does the mechanics, you get your bill from the hospital or the provider, and then you use money.
So, in terms of the dollars that are in the account, the county makes that contribution in behalf of the employee into that account. If the employee wants additional dollars of their own,
No, but how do they pay it?
okay, so, go ahead.
Well, like, I have one, and when I go to the doctor, it used to be that they would want some kind of payment, so you'd give them like $20 as a down payment, and then you wait for that to be adjudicated, find out what the allowed amount is. I don't want to pay my doctor more than what he's going to charge in the end, because then I have to go back to him and collect. So usually if I'm giving him any amount, it's going to be significantly less than what I know the allowed amount's going to be. So let's say I give him $20, and then once it runs through the insurance and comes back and the allowed amount's $100, then out of this HSA account, I can just pay him the additional $80.
And how do you do that?
Well, you can do it with a debit card if you'd like, but I think you can also have the administrator cut them a check. You could just pay for that out of your own credit card. Some people like to do that to build up their Sky Miles or whatever, get the credit card points funds, and then they can go to the administrator, like NBS, and ask them to cut them a check back. So there's various ways that you can pay for it. There's flexibility there on how you as a consumer want to go about it.
The easiest way is to use the debit card. So if you're going to the pharmacy, that's, typically you have to pay that at the time of purchase. So pull out that debit card and get the prescription at the time of purchase.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention to Greg, like, so mine, the incentive is, it's tax deductible, so whatever amount I deposit in my HSA account, I can write that amount off on my taxes. And it's helpful because now I'm building up a balance, that I can use on, for health reasons that normally I probably wouldn't have budgeted for. But the tax incentives is what makes it particularly attractive, I think, for a lot of employees. So I don't know if this program through the county is any different, but.
So, who makes the investment decision on those funds? Is the individual or the county?
It's an individual. So you can just leave the dollars in the account as if it were just a regular savings account with very little interest on it. Or once you build up a reasonable amount, then there are investment options within that account you can put your money, but that's up to the individual to make that decision.
If there are those investment options limited, or are they on?
I can't tell you, so that's
I'm curious as to who actually controls those funds.
Yeah, they typically will work with like a Fidelity, one of those types of organizations, and then whatever funds that are available through that, say Fidelity.
So, question. So is this pre-tax for the employees, and then the benefit for them is that we match it as their employer? The money's on there, or do they get to write off the deposited amount? So they don't.
It's not a match. Okay.
I'm sorry, just trying to understand.
The county just
incentive there.
contributes. The employees don't have to put in anything.
Oh, okay.
But they can. And the money belongs to the employee at that time. The county is going to do.
So what money the employees deposit, do they get to write that amount off their income?
Correct.
Or is it pre-tax?
No, it's tax-free.
So that's
That's,
great.
I mean, it's
So,
not
yeah,
taxed.
it's not taxed. As long as you're using it for health care, it is not taxed.
So you know.
And back to the investment portion of that, what you earn in the investment side is tax-free as well. That just generates within that, let's say.
I think, so you mentioned there was limits to who's able to enroll in one of these plans. And is there other stuff with pre-existing conditions and stuff that would exclude you from a health savings option?
Not pre-existing conditions.
I guess, I mean, we were kind of talking about advantages to the employee, but I was curious, as an employer, what kind of advantages there are for this trend that we're seeing of having more and more folks enrolled in the HSA. Are there advantages for us besides the lower premiums?
Well, the cost of the plan is lower. So it just depends upon how you want to approach it, because as people migrate and based on what you're putting in, it could actually cost the county a little bit more. You know, if you're putting in more than the difference in the premiums between traditional and the high deductible plan, okay? So as people make that migration, that might actually cost a little bit more, so just kind of keep that in mind. But it's all over the board, so we have some school districts that it's worked with that put zero in their behalf of their employees. So, you know, from a budget standpoint, you need to kind of decide, okay, some employers just look at it and say, well, here's the cost of the traditional, here's the cost of the high deductible plan. We'll just pay into your health savings account the difference, and so it's cost neutral to the employer, okay? I think you might be a little bit higher than the difference between the two.
We are, aren't we?
Well, the difference currently, you have the sheet.
I do.
The difference currently between a family premium, on the traditional plan, it's 1,900, and Mark will bring these numbers up. And for an HSA, the family premium is 1,573. So the monthly difference between those two is $331.
Can you see?
Yeah, so go to the, okay, so yeah, it's hard to see, but that 1905 is what the current family premium is on a traditional plan versus on the HSA it's 1573. So that monthly difference is $332 if we're rounding to the nearest dollar. And the county's paying 80%, is that right? What percent?
Toward their HSA,
No, just towards the cost of
the HSA, then 100% of the premium. Traditionally, employee has to pay, so.
What is the, do you know what the percentage is?
Does Chris have it?
Where's that? There you go.
yeah, so this is the difference in the cost. So it's about $300, and then the county's putting in $200.
The employee pays off, that's $331. That's the employee portion.
Yeah.
That's the traditional.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding right, what you're saying is that the benefit to the county if, for people to be on the high deductible plan depends on the amount of money that the county or the, us as employers are putting into their health savings plan, correct? Am I understanding it? So you're saying some, like school districts, do not put any money like we are into.
Right, so the driver here is the cost difference between those two plans, okay? And there's, we have a good illustration, but with that traditional plan, you're paying for, in essence, a Cadillac plan, okay? With the high deductible plan, you're paying for a less expensive plan. And so the question that I ask folks is, on that traditional plan, if you didn't incur any expenses, did the insurance company come back and cut you a check because you didn't use any of the insurance? The answer is no, because it just all goes to the insurance company. So the concept here is, well, can we not, buy a plan that costs less money, have the difference, you're in a bucket, whether the employer keeps that difference or whether you share that to the employees. Now you're retaining some of that money. For those that have to use it, they use it. For those that don't have to use it, that's like the insurance company cutting them a check back. So that's a little bit of the concept here, is retain some of that money rather than just give that off to the insurance plan, and leave it to the discretion of the employee as to whether they can do things in how they use the plan to retain that, or they might have to spend it. You know, they may have a lot of health issues and have to spend it. That's what it's there for. But it's up to the employer what they put into that health savings account on behalf of that employee.
So it would be a big benefit to an employer, in the example you gave in the school district, that they just, paid the amount of the high deductible. And
Right.
then that would be a big savings to.
But then you may have migration back now, so folks are gonna say, okay, I'm getting nothing in my health savings account to help me pay for my expenses. I may be better off paying the extra premium to be on the traditional plan than to have to come up with my own money to put in my health savings account. So that's a little bit of why employers want to put some money into that health savings account, to give a little incentive to help people build up that account so when they do need to tap in.
And you said earlier that we're close to that recommended maximum for incentives.
So we're close to, let me see if I can know, it's to 1/3.
Correct. Of the out-of-pocket max. So your current out-of-pocket max on that HSA plan is $4,000 for a single, $6,550 for a family. You want to give them enough to have, to meet some of that higher deductible on that plan, but you don't want to give them so much so that everyone just goes over there and then it costs them more.
Can you just highlight, the difference between the traditional and high deductible as far as the deductible amount?
Yeah.
Just compare them to a little bit.
You bet. And I
Could you-
apologize that it's so small. In fact, can you maybe blow up?
Can you blow it up a little bit?
And let's start at the top right here. So on the traditional plan, if you're a single, your deductible is $1,000, and then you've got this $2,000 if you're a family. And then the out-of-pocket max is $4,800. And then this is the high deductible health plan here. It's got $2,000 for a single, $4,000 for a family. Out-of-pocket max of $4,065.50. And one of the other key differences, as I was mentioning earlier, is that like on this traditional plan, one of the things that makes it attractive is you can go to the doctor on day one and just pay $25 and be done. You never had to meet this $1,000 deductible up here. On an HSA, everything is subject. This AD stands for after deductible. So you have to meet that deductible even before you go in to, you got a sore throat or something, you want to go in, you have to meet your deductible first. The only exception to this is preventive care. That's covered at 100% on either plan regardless of deductible. But other than that, everything's going to be subject to the deductible on the HSA plan.
So it's a bit of a risk for an employee to sign up for that. Just knowing that they have more of a deductible to pay. Once they get a little bit saved up in their account, then, they can rest a little easier knowing that they don't have to come up with all that out of pocket in one day.
Is can you have a health savings account and it's not be on the traditional?
Has to be covered with qualified plan.
And there's two reasons why this traditional is not qualified, because this deductible's at 1,000 and the IRS set the minimum at 1,350. So the deductible's too low to be qualified, and also having upfront coverage makes it disqualified. Having that $25 copay before your deductible. But this, this plan isn't too far off of being qualified. If this deductible were bumped up to 1,350 and you made everything subject to the deductible, then this plan would qualify.
And we were looking at the history of the plans the other day, and it appeared that the premiums for the two different plans were increasing at different rates. Does that have anything to do with the percentage of employees that are enrolled in each?
We believe it's a function within the carrier and how membership is migrated from traditional to qualified high deductible. So we went to Cigna and said, hey, now wait a minute. Typically, plans will increase the same amount, and we told them we need you to make those equal increase. They've done that, but I think for the type of plan that you're on, which is this level funded type of plan, I think they view, because the membership is making that migration over to a less expensive plan, I think they're trying to bump that up a little bit. Told them to bring this back to equal increase. So you'll receive it. The increase is the same, that we're having them reallocate so that both plans increase equally. Does that make sense?
It does, but I don't know if we saw that when it came through. So is that in effect for this year, or would that be?
That would be in effect for 2019. So the renewal that we received for 2019, there was a variation in that increase, and we told Cigna that we need to have you equalize those.
So what do those negotiation processes look like?
With the carriers, so unfortunately, it's a pretty fluid process. So, carriers will basically look at your claims experience. They also look at what we call trend or rate of inflation for healthcare. They're looking at the risk that could be perceived in the future. They're looking at demographics, so what's the age of the group, male, female, children, that type of thing. All of those items come into the process of coming up with a rate. Okay? Once we receive that renewal, this is kind of the unfortunate part, but there is some ability to negotiate that, if we say to the carrier, well, you know what, based on some of the information we have, consider, well, this person that you see on your records as being sick, we see that particular illness has come to an end. So we'll try and leverage him a little bit with the claims information that we have as well, and knowing whether some of those illnesses have come to an end or not. If we have an underwriter in our office that takes that same data, runs a calculation, based on the formula that we perceive it should be looked at, and if we see some variation there, we'll say, okay, now our underwriter looked at it this way. You increased admin or some different factors in your formula. He's looked at it kind of a little bit of a different way. Maybe consider how he has done his calculation. Another thing is just flat out a threat to the carrier and say, well, the employer cannot afford this increase. If you can't get us to this number, then we may have to look at alternative carriers. Okay? So it's, unfortunately, there's a little bit of a game involved there with the carriers. You kind of have to play hardball with them sometimes and try and get them to a number that's doable for the employer.
So
But
what,
obviously, there's a stopping point. They may say, okay, yeah, we can get from here to here, but any lower than that, we're gonna lose money. And they may stop at that sort of point.
but they may respond to the threat of going out to bid and going other. So, what should,
To a point.
so what should we consider and how often we go out to bid and whether that's an annual thing or?
We bid quite a bit lately. You can go to bid every year. I think over time, if you do that on a yearly basis, then you start to lose credibility with the carriers, because then they just say, oh, that's Grand County, they bid every year. We'll just throw a number at it and be done with it because it's not worth our time. So you have to be a little bit careful when bidding. If through our underwriter, kind of comparing the numbers with the carrier's underwriter and the claims, if we can look at that and say, okay, this looks pretty reasonable, we probably ought to take it, and we share that, and we take it. If we can see, hey, you know what, there's some room here, and we're not getting any leverage here, that's definitely when we want to take it.
I was just getting ready to actually answer that question before you ask it. These guys have done what they do for us, and the renewals come back from our carrier, all the dental, vision, life, health, all of the insurance that we have with benefits. If they come back at a trend or even, a little bit less than what that is, they'll get a hold of us, the HR director, when I say us, and then they actually beat them up pretty bad, the carriers, and we've never paid this amount when the renewal comes back what it was. We've changed carriers many times. We were just listening at 3 years. So it was 3 years ago that we changed, and that's when they went to bid.
So, as the experts on this, if we're, as employers, trying to be frugal with our expenses as a county, if we're looking at this trend between moving from one plan to another, what are some recommendations that you have in terms of incentives and how high we should go with those, or should we be worried that more and more folks are going towards, identifying that you said at some point the incentives are going to cost more than if we had everyone on a traditional plan. So I think that we feel like that's kind of close.
And at the end of the day, if the cost to the county were the same between traditional and qualified plan, it's determined that your employees tend to be better utilizers under the qualified plan versus being on the traditional plan. Because if I go to the doctor and I'm paying a $25 copay or a $35 copay, do I really care what the cost of that doctor's office really is? Do I even know, is that a $80 visit or is that a $250 visit? I may not even know at the time of the service until I see my explanation of benefits on the tail end. And on the other hand, if I'm on this qualified plan and and I know that I'm paying this deductible up front, and that's coming out of my pocket, I'm gonna take a minute and find out what my costs are, because that's now my money. Okay? So, I think even if the costs were equal, I think we're at least sending our employees down the path of being better consumers for health.
Has there ever been any studies that have proven that? I've looked and have not found any. So where would you find that? Where there is proof that people become that much greater shoppers for healthcare, because especially in a town this size, our shopping is limited.
Right.
And so I don't know
Yeah,
if it does.
yeah, and it's, the understanding is that it helps to send people down that path, but are the dollars significant? You know, claims are claims. So if I'm going in for an appendectomy, it's going to cost the same whether I'm on the traditional or the high-deductible plan. Okay? But I think to me, it still helps to make people more aware of the cost of health care and to be a little more involved with that decision making of their personal health care.
I've just never, and I've been on insurance committees before in my previous job, and I have not. Chris, have you seen any of those studies or seen where there is proof that people become much better? Either Chris? I haven't. I think it's a theory. In which, yeah. So does it make, so does that make you healthier? That's the question. Are you not going to a doctor when you need to? Because of the money.
Take a quick look at this.
I would say, I'm not gonna quote a study, but I would say that's been the impact since I started in HSA. And now I'm looking at costs of, like, I had an x-ray done on my shoulder and my back from an old football injury. With my HSA account, I got a quote from the guys here in the specialist and a quote from some folks in Grand Junction, and was doing kind of a comparison there because I've saved up that money in the account where before I might not have been as sensitive to the economics of it. So I can't quote a study, but it's definitely had that impact on me.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, I'm not arguing the sense, but still at the same time, I know people get busy. And then also, the fact of the matter is, do people choose, because they go to the high deductible, not to get the health care sooner? Because, so I could see in a good debate, you could argue that both sides, both ways. So, I don't think, for me, that's not a selling point. The selling point is what is the best for the employee and what isn't best for the employer. Yes,
So-
Chris?
I just have a couple of questions.
Yes.
And this is more just practical. You've got that much and also I'm wondering at what point like our negotiations. Have you guys gone as far as you? Yeah, I'm asking you.
This is, so it's, I can't remember what it started out.
Well, it
at.
started at the original renewal request from Cigna was at 19.38%,
A what?
19.38. And
Increase
increase,
for both plans?
yeah, combined. And then now they're at 9.58.
Oh, wow, nice.
So, my question, because the last, I think, that I heard the difference in increase between the HSA and traditional
let's come back to this one, go back to this sheet here. So, when they did release that 19, for their original renewal, they were asking, I have to do some scrolling, but they were raising, the high deductible plan was going up 12%. Keep going to that, yeah. So when you compare this 16 or this 617, that's going up 12% compared to where it was currently. Whereas the traditional is going up 7%. That's what you noted. And so we went back to them and said, this seems counterintuitive because their HSA plan is actually run better than the traditional plan. We track that on a quarterly basis and come and share those reports with John. So that's when they came back and said that they would reallocate those, and so the traditional plan is now going up 9.4%, and the HSA is going up 9.73. It's still blending to that same 9.58, but they're bringing those back into alignment to where we're not hitting the HSA so hard.
Is there a reason they are increasing the HSA?
Yeah, I think Mark addressed that earlier. We don't know exactly, but I think that you've got more people migrating over to that plan, so less expensive plan. They probably weren't pulling in as much premium, therefore, on that. So they're.
And how do they justify increasing every year? I mean, what's the reason behind the increase every year? I know they all do, but they just say, we get to do this?
Well, let's go back to this report. This is what we call a second quarter report. And so this basically gives a breakdown of the premiums. Then below that you see the claims, pharmacy, the gross number there. Then you see some administrative costs, what they call reinsurance, because this is a level funded plan. So in the end, as you see the loss ratio at the bottom, so on your traditional plan, your loss ratio is 154. So to make it simple, every $100 you spent in premium, they paid out $154 in claims. Okay. The opposite of that is on the qualified high deductible plan, 63% loss ratio. You total those up to 105% loss ratio. So in the end, if this, well, let's draw this down here a little bit. So let's look at the history. So we have 2016, 17, 18 up here. So in 2016, in the end, your loss ratio was 119%. So for every $100 you paid in premium, they paid out 119 in claims. Okay, so that's a loss for them. So in the end, you know, they're insuring you. It's not like they're going back and saying, okay, you just shorted us 19%, we want that back. But they're basically saying, well, if you're going to run hot like this, then we need to increase your rate. And as we talked about earlier, they're also going to look at claims. You know, what are the large claimants out there? What's the risk for us? Okay, if they see, hey, you have a couple of cancers out there that aren't going to hit until later on in the year, we need to fund for that, because we're trying to protect you as an insurance company, but we can't just always lose money as well. There's also what we talked about was trend, or rate of inflation. So the increasing cost of health care, the cost of those claims every year continually to increase. So that's why, unfortunately, we always typically see an increase, unless So like you can see in 2017, actually the carrier made some money on the county. So in those particular years, we would anticipate that the carrier increase is lower. Rarely do we see a minus. Okay.
You wanna drag that over just a little bit more? So we track this, so for the last 3 years, that year when you had the 190% loss ratio, that was a deficit of 300,000. And then as Mark mentioned, last year you had a good year, so that was a surplus of 272. And then so far with the 105 for the data that we have, the cumulative deficit is $83,000. But this up here where the HSA was running at a 63%, that doesn't always happen that way. You know, if you have one employee who enrolls on that plan and they have a heart attack, then that will blow that loss ratio right out of the water, and it could be that the HSA then is running worse than the traditional.
Does any of this have to do with the rebates that we see?
Are you talking about the profit share from the carrier?
We were trying to look at the total cost, you know, with our incentives that we offer and all that, and it wasn't an easy calculation because apparently there's certain rebates and discounts that come back year to year.
So the platform that the county is on is a little bit different. It's called the level funded plan. And you have, it's kind of in the middle, so you have a fully insured plan. You pay your premiums, you're indemnified, and you're done, okay? And you just pay your premiums through the course of the year. On the other side of the spectrum is self-funded, where you basically say, you know what, hey, we're gonna take on the risk. So rather than transferring the risk to the insurance company, you kind of become the insurance company and you take the risk. Now, typically when you're self-funded, you'll buy reinsurance and you're paying someone to adjudicate your claim. So reinsurance is there. So if you have that catastrophic claim, let's say your specific stop loss is $100,000 and you have someone that has a catastrophic situation, they have a claim that's $200,000. Well, you as kind of the insurance company, you'll pay the $100,000, but the reinsurance company comes in, pays the remainder of that, okay? So that's being self-funded. You're taking on some of the risk, and we see a few groups that do that. The county at one time was self-funded, but at the time it wasn't running really well for the county, and decided maybe we need to go back to fully insured. Now, you're on what's level funded, which is sort of in the middle, where it's on a self-funded platform, but you're protected as if it were fully insured. So what the carrier does is, hey, if you run well, so back to that, this one here, this 2017 year, if the plan is running well, then after all the bills are paid, everything is totaled up at the end, if there's a surplus, then you're on a 50-50 split with Cigna. So they'll keep 50% of the profit, they'll send you 50% of the profit. So for the 2017 year, they actually gave you a refund, it actually came off of admin, $97,000. Because they shared that profit.
What was that? That was one
It
month.
amounted to almost 1 month, not quite.
Now, on the other hand, the 2016 year, if you were self-funded, you would be coming up with some of that loss. You would have to maintain a reserve, so when you have a bad year, you're able to cover that, okay? But the nice thing about the level funded is you're not on the hook for that. So that's where Cigna had to, take on that loss.
where are we on getting our questions? Do you have, Chris or Kaufman or Chris Barron?
Are you guys ready to,
Yeah, they just gave that to us this morning, that they were gonna equalize that, so we should have the revised rates probably by tomorrow.
and you feel like, and
And then,
the week or 2 weeks, you know, that we can prepare to.
As far as the renewal that we have received, the 9.58, that's where we're at. If that's unsatisfactory, then at that point, you probably have to take the bid in hopes of, if someone's willing to, jump in on that. Understand that when carriers bid on your business, they want the information, the same information that Cigna has. So if you said, we're bidding this, then we have to send them the demographic information, so it's a census. It shows all the employees, single, two-party family, male, female, all of that information. They also want to see this claims information, okay? We've been paying in premium, what's been paid out in claims. They also want to look at your large claimants, okay? So there's a list of probably the top 20 large claimants, because they want to know what kind of risk they're stepping into if they want to pick up your group, okay? They also want to see that information 2 years back, okay? So they'll ask for 2 years worth of claims information. So we're always happy to go through the bid process. Will you get a taker? That's another question. Sometimes you get someone that's just anxious for your business, and they might even buy it, but also understand, sometimes when you get too low, then at the end of the day, you may have to make up for that the next year, okay? Because, they pretty much see where your claims are trending and have a good sense of where your claims are going to be. And eventually you might have to pay. We want to keep, let me just show you this line here. This is kind of a graph that shows your claims. So you can see the red is the peaks and the valleys of your claims, okay? And then is it the dark red? The dark red is averaging those peaks and valleys, okay? The green line is the premium that you're paying. So you can see over here on the left where you had that large claimant in there, or two, and you can see as we average that out, that red line is above the green line, okay? We want to keep those lines as close as possible. We don't like it when you see the green line over here and the red line down below, where now the insurance company is making a little bit of money on the group. Sometimes it is what it is, but we like to keep that as close as possible. That kind of makes sense?
I'll just say for the council, we'll have next meeting after where we either accept this renewal or not. But I do think that this ballot has a range and good markup rather than so if you do accept this, wanted to equalize the per employee contribution that the county provides for health benefits between HSA and traditional, but it would have to do with where we stand right now. The way I calculated for the traditional plan, it's about $131 difference.
131?
But, you know, in order to really calculate what that, we would have to take those, take the actual new figures with the equalized. So that's something that the council would have to make a decision on, which is really separate from that.
So-
But it does have to happen before $400.
And Diane, you said we've been doing the same since 2011? And that was,
That's when we started the high deductible plan. I think,
Right.
didn't we start the, partially self-funded in 2013?
and that, that is a formula, or that's a flat rate, or, because hasn't that been going up? The amount that the county contributes to the employees'
No,
savings
that
plan?
stayed the same.
We have not,
Percent.
a percent or an amount?
No, it's an amount, it's a flat amount.
Okay.
And it stayed the same since,
HSA, 200 for a family, 100 for,
Per month.
right, it's a, no, it's 100 for single, 200 for two-party, both family.
okay. Chris, Kaufman.
Sure. So one of the questions I've gotten is about, I think that we all understand the desire to incentivize employees to move to the HSA and the cost savings that we derive from that. So in addition to the contribution the county's making to the HSA, there's also employees on the traditional plan have to pay part of their premium. And part of my question is, what would you recommend as the overall incentive to an employee to switch from the traditional to the HSA? So for a family right now in 2018, that incentive was $6,383. That's the HSA contribution plus the employees paying up their premium. And that's pretty close to the out-of-pocket tax on the HSA plan. So to me, it seems like that's a pretty high incentive. Is there an industry standard in this area? Is there any recommendation you would have to what other employers are doing?
It's kind of all over the board. Typically, we'll see employers charge more for a traditional plan over a qualified plan. We've seen some employers where they just decided, you know what, we're done with traditional and we're going all qualified identical plan. That, you know, if you feel like your folks aren't ready for that, you know, then typically you just require them to pay the difference. So if the traditional plan is that important to you and you don't want to move, then sometimes you just charge that difference to stay on the traditional. It's just kind of what you want to do. There are some employers that they charge a portion of the premium on both plans.
And when you say the difference, that's the difference between the premium just by themselves and the difference between the premium plus the HSA contribution.
It could be just the premium themselves. Some employers charge that difference.
That's exactly what the county did.
Charge the difference, right?
And that could also, back to this sheet that shows the enrollment change, you know, that could also be a driver as well, where folks look at the traditional and having to get payroll deducted for 100% of that premium versus going to the qualified high deductible and not have to be payroll deducted anything for that. So that's a big savings.
Did you ever feel on the side of the extension that will be optimal to get people canceled?
Well, I come back to the question though, is that your objective? Do you want to necessarily drive people from traditional to the qualified plan?
I might be wrong, but to me, when I look at it, there are people that it would be a very burdensome, big burden to not have the choice of the traditional. And that I wouldn't want to.
And I think most employers like to maintain a choice. Even though it might cost the employee a little bit more to be on the traditional, at least they have a choice.
And any other questions? Question? Did you think we got, I've looked through the ones we sent, it looks like we got most of them answered.
I don't know if I have, and to Baird's question about we need to have a plan ready for open enrollment, I don't know if I feel like I have an answer.
Well, it'll be, I would put it on the next time. Discuss that often. And it's gonna, it will depend on what the council wants to do. Obviously, if the premium of the additional plan goes up above what an employee could contribute to an HSA and get their max deductible in 1 year, then the premium, everyone would probably switch over because you put that same amount of paid into the premium, into an HSA, it's pre-tax, you get your max deductible in a period of time. So it really kind of depends, you gotta look at how the premium stacks up. I mean, right now, for instance, if you wanted to equalize the cash contribution per employee, you would either have to eliminate the HSA contribution or reduce the premium by the same amount for the traditional plan. That would equalize the county's contribution per employee. And, I don't know if that's what you want to do or if you want to do something a little bit different. I mean, like I say, right now, if we add up the county's contribution, just looking at the traditional plan, there's a difference of about $131 that would need to be utilized in that.
I guess I was looking for some coaching experts to answer versus question. He put it on our radar that we were gonna have to answer these, and I was like,
Well, I mean, I think you have to think of that from the county's fiscal perspective, but also think about it from the perspective of what value you're operating in. But obviously, we're getting to the point where with the HSA contribution, that we're very close to county costs. We are pretty close up to the HSA contribution. But, I mean, the value of the HSA for me is that I get to choose how much I keep in health insurance. And I can judge that based on how healthy I am, how healthy my family is. So, that holds a lot of value, even when people say, I only put this amount in this. I can judge my own needs. But if you obviously choose a traditional plan, you're not going to do a certain amount of insurance. So, math will set it right there in itself for the HSA, regardless of whether there's, a contribution or you get to choose how much you put in based on what you estimate.
Good decision.
Just a comment that we work with a number of municipalities, school districts, so forth. And they look at all of this as a benefit package. And I don't know what it's like here, but there's a big build out in employee retention in the benefit package. So, just a thought that as you look at insurance, that's really a part of your compensation package. And if your insurance plan became watered down significantly, is everyone going to, jump ranks, go to the city or go someplace else to work? We work with Ogden School District and Weaver School District and their neighboring school districts. And just one minor tweak that took place with Ogden School District, all of a sudden,
Every move.
they're migrating over to Weaver School District just for an insurance benefit change. Okay? So, it's good to kind of think of this globally as a benefit package.
We don't have those problems.
Oh, no, people are jumping over the city. Any further questions? Diane? Chris?
I would just make one comment. These guys, if they are going to have the bid, need to get on the stick. It just doesn't happen overnight.
If you decide, hey, we still want to shop, that's a month-long activity. So your open enrollment date may change. Okay.
And we can't go past December 31st and not have.
So we probably should have it on the agenda for,
Yeah,
the 7th.
If the renewal that you have is satisfactory, then we're basically going to go back, reallocate these rates to make them equal and get that to you folks so then you can determine what's our payroll contribution going to be and what's our HSA contribution going to be.
I think with the pain in the butt of the insured having to learn the new system and what's included and what's not included and where they can go and where they can't go, that just as like a straw poll sort of thing, I'm fine with the renewal and staying with these guys for next year. I'm just trying to figure out the county's contribution between the 50-50 split with the premium increases or paying the same premium for both plans or all that.
So that's where your debate is.
Yeah.
Curtis?
Similar.
I agree. Roy? Okay, so a straw poll indicates that we're probably not interested in going out to bid, if that's helpful. It's not official, it's not on the agenda. It's just a straw poll. So, but we do have a lot of decisions to be made.
And just hearing where we're at, do you have any last minute coaching on some of those options of the covering the premium increases as the county for employees? Like a 50-50 option or keeping it the same between the plans or?
So you're asking payroll contributions.
Yeah.
So I come back to the question of what's your budget? So if your budget says we can take the 9% increase, we're good, then in my mind, you stay the course. If you say, hey, our budget will only allow for a 5% premium increase. Now we've got 4 some odd percent to deal with. What are we going to do with that? Well, then it becomes a benefit change to the plan. So now do we change and increase a deductible, increase an out-of-pocket maximum, something like that, to close that gap to bring this to a 4 or a 5% increase if the budget doesn't allow for a 9? Or do we pass some of that along to the employee and say, well, now we're going to increase the employee contribution to get us from the 9% to the 5%. So I kind of put the question back as to what is your budget? And if your budget is, we can absorb a 9% increase from the insurance carrier, then it's just a matter of to me, it's staying the course and saying, well, let's keep the qualified high deductible as no premium contribution, and whatever the premium contribution is on the traditional plan, we just continue to do that as well. That, if that's a percentage, on your traditional plan, if that's a percentage, then they'll see a little bit of a bump in their premium contribution as well, because if the plan went up 9%, then the employee's contribution would go up 9% as well, supposedly. On your HSA contribution, here again, that's just kind of a budget decision that you folks need to make. So if what you're doing right now fits in the budget, it's acceptable, then you stay the course. If that's above and beyond your budget, maybe you back off that a couple $100. That's a choice.
So it's a
you all need to
budget.
make.
Budget. Does that answer your question without answering your question?
Hey, I'll give away the farm if you let me.
Any further questions? Thank you for your time. I found this very helpful and I learned a lot, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will move to general business action item discussion and consideration. Approving proposed public notice, if needed, following the November 6, 2018 election to solicit letters of interest for Grant County Council, for County Council appointment and state representative, senators and representatives appointment to serve on the 5-member appointment council, who will then select the 7-member study committee to study Grand County's form of government. The reason I wanted to make this decision today is because 10 days after the canvass, which is the 20th, correct?
Yes.
The
4 o'clock.
20th, we have to have a person chosen for that council, which would not be possible if we, or be very, very close if we don't get some applications. I also felt it was really important that we make this as open and transparent a process as possible. That for buy-in of the community, we need to make sure that anyone and everyone in the community who has an interest in being on that council to choose the committee has an opportunity to give us their name. And this was the only way that I could see that we could do it. So I thought, well, if we approve this public announcement, or approve that we're ready to do it, but we won't do it until it won't be put in the paper unless Proposition 9 passes. If Proposition 9 does not pass, then it won't go in the paper because it's a moot point. So that is why I worked to get a public announcement ready for the paper, and why I felt it was important for us to approve it now, because it would be we couldn't approve it on the 7th because the papers would already be out to publish. So
Motion to approve.
motion to approve. Second. Any further discussion?
I just had a question about holding public office. Was that spelled out in the?
It's spelled out.
And that,
That was from legal review.
and does that include like some of the advisory boards and that kind of stuff? Is that considered a position, or is that?
That's not employment.
That's not
Okay.
employment. That's not employment. Any
Madam
other-
Chair, yes, did you want to explain how you're going to handle the state, how Miles
Okay,
will
then,
handle the state
the
part of
reason
this?
I talked to Senator Hinkins, Watkins, and Albrecht, because I thought, boy, they're in the same situation we are. And they're going to need to have some way of determining who they're going to appoint, because they appoint someone as well. So I called them and asked them if they would like to be on this ad, and they were very much said yes. So, but then so instead of having the people send their letter of interest to each individual representative, we're going to have them send them all to the county, compile them, and then send them a file of the letters of interest, so they're not getting these straggling in, like one on one day and one on the other day. They'll get a file with all the people who have sent letters of interest in. So, and I was going to invite them if they wanted to be at the November 20th meeting, just in case people come, because, in the ad, it said that if they had wanted to be, not necessary, but if they wanted to be here on the 20th, when we decide, they can, or they could, if they give us advance notice, if they can't be here, they could call in. Does that make sense?
Yes, I believe we were planning to send them through email. I believe
Yes,
that's
email.
how they typically prefer to receive them, and we would do a read receipt or read receipt, whatever it is, in Outlook, so that we know that they actually got them. So it would go to all three, and that would be the very next day after the deadline, and the deadline is coordinated with our council packet deadline
So we could get
for
it
the
in
November
time.
20th meeting, where you all would make the council's appointment.
So that would give us ample opportunity to look at all the letters of interest, come up with who we thought, and, go through a process. And we might even want to streamline that before then. If we got time to do that, but we don't. We needed to, I felt we needed to make this decision today. So since we're having a workshop, I threw it on.
Makes sense.
Any other clarification?
You think 1 week is enough for people to respond?
That's all we got, really, because we have to wait until after the election, and it's the Thursday after the election.
We have that 10-day, the thing that really made it tough is in the law, it says you have 10 days after the canvass.
It's a pretty tight deadline.
Yeah, it's really bad. But that's what we're faced with, and that's why, we've had to shorten I would have rather had two, but I'm telling people, I think the word's getting out, that there's, I think just with this, because it's amazing the number of people in this community, our citizens are so active politically, that there's a lot of people that get these agendas in their email, they sign up to get them, and so they're already knowing that this is up and about. So it's already out there for people who tend to be focused on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and I, tell people, put it on if you do Facebook.
Do you, and obviously the 5-member would be completely separate from the 7-member?
That is not as clear it's not as clear in the bill. I'll reread it, and I'll also get, not just me, but we'll also get advice from the attorney. It's not clear when I read it over that they can't appoint themselves, but I don't think they should.
Just the 5-member appointment council selects the 7-member study committee, is that right? So,
The way I keep it is there's this council and a committee.
I'm just worried that in a week, we're kind of trying to kick 12 people up out of the dust, and we're going to find people to fill all these spots.
Well, then the 5-member committee has till,
they're not strict with that.
the 5-member council, I believe, has till January 1st. to fix the
Well,
committee.
it's 30 days after they first meet,
After
and they
first
have to
meet.
meet, within 10 days after they're appointed. So
I
there's,
had that on my table, and I had a meeting before,
It's
and
gonna move quick.
yeah, it's gonna go boom, boom, boom.
and to Diana's benefit, she chose November 20th as the canvas of the vote date, as the furthest out possible she could
Thank you,
provide
Diana.
for state vote, and it happened to fall on our regular council meeting. So, I mean, it's very tight. It's the best we got.
So talk about it, get the word out. Maybe, maybe it'd be in this paper. That we are hunting for letters of interest.
Okay.
Okay?
So we have a motion.
We have a motion, we have a second, right? Motion by Curtis, second by Terry, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously, 7-0. We have another meeting in 29
Motion to adjourn.
minutes. Motion to adjourn by, second by Terry, Curtis, motion by Curtis, second by Terry, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. At the city. At the city.